It started with a question no one expected the governor of Minnesota to take head-on. What happens when the government's official version of a deadly shooting collapses the moment the public presses play on a cell phone video? Before anyone could blink, the Minneapolis shooting involving federal agents had spiraled into a national flashpoint, and the first voice to break through the noise was Tim Walz himself. His reaction didn't come wrapped in careful political language or the usual cautious messaging. It came with the force of a man watching his state slip into confusion while a federal narrative swept across the country like a pre-written story waiting for the public to accept it.
So then, just to follow up, because then if that is not the case, what are the people of Minnesota supposed to do who are in the middle right now? Because if they do Stonewall and you're trying to investigate, is that force
it's a good
force?
question. And look, I speaking to the people of Minnesota right now, I hear that scream from you, and I'll continue to plead and ask you for peace. And I know the answer is you ask us for peace and we give it, and we get shot in the face on the streets coming out of a donut shop. We cannot give them what they want. I don't know how to say this in so many terms to watch the madness that we've witnessed over this last week coming out of the White House and what it's doing here. My confidence is, and I say it to Minnesotans, as I've said, exercise your First Amendment rights, speak out, bear witness and document legally. But I understand the risk in that, and I understand the courage that it takes to have people out there doing this. Thank God we have video, because according to DHS, these 7 heroic guys took an onslaught of a battalion against them or something. It's nonsense, people. It is nonsense, and it's lies. So my confidence is this, Minnesotans. You know who you are, and you demonstrate it every single day, and we damn sure know who these people are. The American public knows, and this needs to be the event that says enough.
But the public didn't accept it, and neither did he. From the opening moments, this wasn't just another clash between officials. It was a collision between recorded reality and a version of events many Minnesotans believed didn't match what actually happened on their own streets. Walz didn't wait for more statements out of Washington. He pushed back immediately, challenging the DHS description of the confrontation and calling out what he viewed as inconsistencies that demanded answers. His stance wasn't couched in speculation. It was rooted in something everyone saw: the footage that ordinary people captured on their phones, the same footage that contradicted nearly every early detail released by federal authorities. The shooting itself unfolded in seconds, but the aftermath grew louder by the hour. Federal officials described the target as a threat, a man who they claimed refused to comply, who allegedly approached armed agents in a manner they said left them no choice but to use force. But the moment the governor watched the video, something in the story cracked wide open. The footage didn't show a weapon. It didn't show aggression. It didn't show an advancing threat. It showed a man filming, trying to observe what was going on, then suddenly being surrounded, sprayed, pulled down, and ultimately shot in front of people who had already been shaken by weeks of unrest. That discrepancy lit a fire across Minnesota. Walz knew what that meant. He had lived through another traumatic moment for the state years earlier. He understood what it looked like when official accounts diverged from visible reality. So when the DHS narrative came out almost immediately after the shooting, polished, confident, leaving no room for doubt, he didn't simply question it. He dismantled it, piece by piece, pointing out that the story being told didn't match what Minnesotans were seeing with their own eyes. And that was the moment the conversation changed. Because when a governor says the official explanation doesn't add up, people listen. And when video proof supports that skepticism, people don't just listen, they mobilize. While DHS held firm to its statements, the public wasn't convinced. Neighbors, protesters, elected officials, and everyday Minnesotans poured into the streets, asking whether federal agents had exaggerated the threat, mishandled the situation, or tried to control the narrative before allowing state investigators access to the evidence. Rumors surfaced that federal authorities initially refused to turn over key information. Some witnesses claimed they were pushed back from the scene before they could fully understand what was happening. Although the federal officials dismissed those suggestions, the perception of withholding fair or not made tensions worse. And in moments like that, perception becomes just as powerful as fact. Walz's response sharpened quickly. He called for the state's investigative bureau to take over immediately. He demanded transparency. He criticized what he described as inconsistencies and misleading elements in the federal timeline. And when reporters pressed him, he didn't hide his anger. He made it clear that Minnesota would not sit quietly while a story that conflicted with visible evidence was being pushed nationwide. In a time when public trust was already fragile, his words hit especially hard. The community erupted because this wasn't happening in a vacuum. Just weeks earlier, another deadly incident involving federal enforcement had shaken Minneapolis. A mother had been shot during a separate operation, and the explanations surrounding that event had also sparked widespread doubt. So now, when the second fatal shooting happened, people were already on edge. They weren't just reacting to one tragedy, they were reacting to a pattern they feared was emerging. A pattern of force. A pattern of confusion, a pattern of narratives that didn't line up with lived experience. So by the time the governor stepped in front of a microphone, the public was ready for someone to say the part that had been whispered for days: "This story doesn't make sense." Parents, students, nurses, workers, elders, everyone seemed to have an opinion. Videos circulated, witnesses spoke out, commentators dissected frames and slowed down clips, analyzing every angle of the incident. And through all of that, the same question kept resurfacing: why did the federal narrative sound so different from the video? Was it a misunderstanding, poor communication, or something more concerning? No one knew, but everyone saw the contradiction, and it became impossible to ignore. And then Walz made the statement that would define the moment. He said Minnesotans needed to trust what they're seeing. That single line became a rallying cry. It resonated because people were tired of being told not to believe their own eyes. They were tired of hearing polished statements that seemed disconnected from what their own community was experiencing. And they were tired of violence unfolding in a city still healing from past trauma. Protests grew. Some were peaceful, filled with candles, signs, and chants for accountability. Others were tense, with lines of officers facing crowds demanding clarity. Yet even in the tension, there was a clear message: the people were not stepping back. They wanted answers. They wanted the truth, not a narrative that felt like it had been rushed out before the dust even settled. Walz's insistence on a state-led investigation only energized them. They felt he was standing with them rather than above them. Behind the scenes, as state investigators tried to step in, rumors swirled that federal officials were slowing the process. Some local leaders hinted that access to crucial evidence wasn't immediate. Others claimed that the presence of federal agents had complicated the ability to secure the scene properly. Again, DHS denied wrongdoing. They reiterated that they were fully cooperating and that their account was accurate. But skepticism had already taken root. And when skepticism grows in an environment soaked with fear and grief, it spreads quickly. Walz understood this. That's why he took on the narrative so aggressively. It wasn't just about correcting misinformation, it was about preserving stability. Because when a government's explanation appears to conflict with proof in front of the public's eyes, chaos follows. You can feel it in the air. People start doubting institutions, they start questioning motives. They start wondering whether they are safe or whether they will be the next accidental casualty of a misinformed operation. That fear isn't theoretical, it's visceral. As the days passed, the governor's push for transparency became more pointed. He didn't back down when confronted. He didn't soften his tone when federal officials insisted their story was accurate. He stood firmly on the side of the people who had been recording, documenting, and living through the moment. And that position made him a direct counterweight to DHS's Kristi Noem, whose statements held unwavering confidence in the agents involved. When the two narratives clashed, Noem's unwavering defense of federal agents versus Walz's insistence that the story didn't match the footage, the nation suddenly had a conflict to watch. Commentators called it a test of leadership. Others called it a fight for truth. But for Minnesotans, it wasn't theoretical at all. It was personal. They wanted to know why a man was shot while on the ground. They wanted to know why the official statement contradicted video taken from 10 feet away. They wanted to know why state investigators weren't immediately given access to everything they needed. And the most important question of all, would anyone be held accountable? As pressure mounted, Walz activated additional resources to keep the city stable, including support units to help manage the protests. This wasn't a show of force, it was a strategy to preserve space for people to exercise their rights without fear. He urged residents to speak, to document, to bear witness, not recklessly, not violently, but boldly. He acknowledged the risk, the courage, the tension that came with standing up in moments like these, but he also reminded them that accountability doesn't come from silence, it comes from visibility. And visibility is exactly what had shaken the official story from the start, because without the video, none of this would have happened. Without the footage, the narrative would have stood as fact. Without those few seconds of real, raw recording, the public might never have known there was another version of events unfolding. That's why the moment Tim Walz said, "Thank God we have video," it hit so deeply. It wasn't just relief, it was a warning about how easily the truth can be reshaped if no one is watching. As the investigation moves forward, one thing remains certain: this moment changed Minnesota. Residents now believe more strongly in the power of documentation, the importance of oversight, and the need for leaders who challenge narratives when something feels off. Walz's stance didn't erase the pain or stop the unrest, but it did give people something they desperately needed, someone willing to ask the questions they were already whispering. And that's why this story isn't going away anytime soon. If you want updates as this investigation unfolds and more breakdowns like this one, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next.